In a small village where the winter winds howl through the old roofs, an older man lived alone with his memories and sorrow. He thought that the rest of his days would just be silent. Until one day in the foggy forest, he heard a weak groan, a German shepherd dog, abandoned, stuck in the mud, and despairing. Two lives that seemed to be withering unexpectedly became each other's light. And what happened next? Well, that is the story. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. My name is Thomas. I'm 65 years old. If anyone asked me what the most significant moment in my life was after my wife passed, I would say it was the winter morning last year. The day I thought would be just another quiet day, but it turned out to be the beginning of something no one could have expected. I live alone in an old wooden house at the edge of the village where no one comes by, unless they have a reason. After Clara, my wife, passed away from a terminal illness, the house became empty. My son works far away and rarely calls. The days passed quietly, and I only clung to my old habits, brewing strong black coffee, reading the newspaper, and going out to the backyard every morning to clean up the debris that the wind and storm had scattered the night before. That morning was colder than usual. The sky was gray, and the wind howled through the trees like a sigh from someone in the forest. I threw on my thick wool coat, holding my old shovel, planning to clean up the broken branches from last night's snowstorm. But I heard a strange sound as I stepped to the forest's edge, where the villagers always warned me about wolves on full moon nights, a groan weak, as if someone was trying to scream for help but couldn't. I stood still for a few seconds. My ears listened intently. The groan came again, fragile, as if it was about to fade. My instincts from my time in the army kicked in immediately, and I straightened my back. I pushed through the thick bushes, my heart pounding, unsure if it was from the cold or something waiting ahead. And then I saw it, a creature. What I first thought was a rotten tree trunk, shaking in a deep mud puddle, submerged up to its belly. It was a German shepherd, its body thin and skeletal, its fur matted and dirty, its eyes sunken, but still holding a faint glimmer. It tried to move, but seemed completely exhausted. The way it looked at me, not fearful, just pleading, I threw my shovel aside and knelt, my aged hands starting to dig through the cold mud. The wind howled in my ears, but I didn't care. Despite my hands freezing and my knees aching, I continued. The mud covered the animal up to its chest, as if someone had deliberately left it there to die. Only a few minutes passed, but I was sweating despite the cold. I thought if I were any slower, maybe it wouldn't make it. Finally, I pulled it out, its body as cold as stone. It didn't resist, just lay still in my arms, as if it had given up. I held it close and walked back home. Mud all over my clothes, my shoes soaking wet, but it didn't matter anymore. I didn't know why I did it. I just knew my heart hadn't beaten this strongly since Clara left. I didn't know whether I had just saved a dog, or something bigger. I didn't know how I still had the strength to carry it back home. The road from the forest's edge was only about half a kilometer. But with the bone-chilling cold, the mud sticking to my clothes and my aging body, each step felt like dragging a mountain. The dog was almost unconscious, its head resting on my arm, occasionally shuddering. Once inside, I placed it on the old rug next to the fireplace, threw my coat onto the chair, and rushed to the kitchen to heat some water and find the cleanest towel I had left. I had done first aid for my comrades on the battlefield before, but with this frail creature, I found myself trembling in a way I couldn't explain. I wiped away the dirt that covered its rough fur, speaking softly as I did. "It's okay now, you're safe. You're not alone anymore." The dog didn't react much, But when I leaned in close, I saw its eyes crack open, brown, cloudy, exhausted, but still holding something like trust. Not the kind of fearful avoidance you see in abused animals, but a look, waiting for me to prove I wasn't like the people who had abandoned it. I froze for some reason. I felt I was being stripped bare by its gaze. I named it Bruno. Not sure why. I just felt that name. Fit, the first day passed with Bruno's weak groans and labored breathing. I made some chicken soup, watered it, let it cool, and spooned small amounts into its mouth. Every time it licked a bit, it nodded its gaze, never leaving me. Sometimes I sat down beside it, back against the wall, just to breathe with it in silence. I laid a blanket next to its resting spot, and that night, I slept on the floor. Not because it needed me, but because I needed to be close to it. The next morning, Bruno lifted his head. I was not fully awake, but enough to crawl towards my feet while pouring coffee. I didn't say anything. I just extended my hand. It lightly licked my fingertips, then rested its head on my leg silently, as if it had known me forever. I looked at it. Thin bandages wrapped around its leg-wound eyes, still tired. And I knew I wasn't just saving a dog, I was saving a forgotten soul. Just like me. In the days that followed, Bruno started regaining strength. It ate more, stumbled a few steps around the living room. And when I read the morning paper, it lay next to my chair, eyes half closed but ears twitching every time I shifted. Then I realized the most crucial thing. Between Bruno and me, an invisible bond was being woven piece by piece through small moments, a look, a breath, a quiet touch. But enough to reignite something I thought had been lost forever: life. Every morning, before the sunlight even had a chance to shine through the window, I'd hear Bruno's claws gently tapping on the old wooden floor. It didn't bark, didn't scratch at the door. It just lay there quietly, waiting for me to wake up, like a friend guarding my dreams. Sometimes I'd wake up startled by the echo of gunshots from my memories. Cold sweat soaking through my shirt, and Bruno moved closer, resting their head on my hand, no words, no questions. He was just there, and that was enough. With each passing step, Bruno grew stronger and more confident. His once matted coat was beginning to shine again, though there were still faint scars in some places. But it was his eyes that had once been clouded with despair, that now gleamed deeply, as though carrying a past I could never fully understand. And then I began to speak. At first it was just idle chatter about the weather, about the apple tree in the backyard, bearing fruit earlier than usual this year. But gradually, the things I had kept hidden in my heart for all these years began to spill out. Clara loved the winter, I said one late afternoon as we sat by the fire. She would make a pot of peppermint tea, smile gently, and tell me not to get mad at the sparrows coming to steal the seeds. Bruno just sat there, his ears slightly tilted toward me. His eyes never leaving my face. I told him about the war, the years away from home, the fire and the death that was just a breath away, about the friend from my platoon who fell right in front of me just because I was a second too slow. I told him about the letters from Clara that I always carried with me, and about the last night I held her hand in the hospital. Hearing the heartbeat monitor slow down and then flatline, that's when I started dying inside Bruno. I sighed. I kept living, but I wasn't alive anymore. Bruno didn't move. He slowly placed a paw on my thigh when I choked on my words, gently, as if to say I understand. One night the wind outside howled like the bombs falling in the old days. I jerked awake from a nightmare, gasping for breath. Before my eyes could adjust to the dim light, I saw Bruno standing there, blocking the way between me and the window. His posture like a soldier, ready to fight for his comrades. At that moment, I understood Bruno, too, carried an invisible wound. One that didn't need to be told, but still smoldered in his heart. He may have once been a military canine, had an owner and mission, and then was left behind. I didn't know for sure, but I knew what it felt like to be abandoned. And perhaps so did Bruno. Two souls, one aging one. A discarded warrior met in the cracks of life. That afternoon began like any other. I made a black teapot, added a ginger slice, and sat in the old rocking chair by the window. Outside, the sunset painted the trees in a sea of bright orange. Bruno lay a few steps away. His eyes half closed, but his ears remained alert. I took the first sip of tea, and suddenly a sharp pain tore across my chest. It wasn't like the usual back pain or numbness that older people get. This pain was sharp, like a knife stabbing from my chest through to my back. My breath was cut off. My heart raced and slowed down abnormally. I dropped the teacup, which shattered on the wooden floor. Bruno immediately jumped up, his eyes wide. I tried to reach for the wall-mounted phone where the village emergency button was, something I never thought I'd need, but my arm wouldn't obey. It just trembled, then went limp like a dry branch. "Bruno," I whispered, falling to the floor. The world blurred, my heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum. And then Bruno acted. Without hesitation, he rushed to the wall where the emergency button was mounted. He leapt up on his hind legs, a surprisingly powerful jump, and used his nose and paws to hit the red button. A short beep sounded, then silence. He didn't stop. Bruno barked loudly throughout the house, his barks urgent, frantic. Not the sound of a normal alert dog, but a desperate cry for help. Then he turned back, nuzzled his head into my chest, licked my hand, and nudged my shoulder with his nose. Doing everything he could to keep me awake, I could only whisper, "Good boy, Bruno, good boy." 10 minutes later, a period that felt like a lifetime, the sound of an ambulance siren reached from far away. The lights flashed through the trees. The first paramedic pushed the door open and stopped when they saw Bruno standing guard beside me, not moving a step. He didn't bark anymore. He just stared at the medic as if to say, "Hurry up, my person is dying." I don't remember much after that, except for the ambulance's bright lights and the machine's cold sound. I only remember one thing. Bruno was somewhere close and I was still alive. Thanks to him. The blinding white lights from above made me squint. The air smelled of disinfectant machines and the heart monitors beeping. Everything felt blurry until a warm and familiar sensation touched my hand. A small groan, like a sigh, deep from the heart. I tried to open my eyes. At first it was blurry, but then I saw a pair of bright brown eyes looking at me with a worry that couldn't be hidden. Bruno. His head was resting on my hand, his ears drooping, his eyes never leaving my face. "Not for a second," I whispered quietly but clearly. "My dog." He called for help. The chief nurse standing next to me, a woman with salt and pepper hair, her eyes red from crying, couldn't hide her astonishment and emotion. "He's awake, he saved you," she said softly. Her voice choked. Bruno didn't bark, jump, or do anything loud. He just lay quietly beside me as if he had just completed a life-or-death mission. He breathed gently, evenly, pressing against my chest to remind me I'm here, we're still together. In the days that followed, the hospital was never the same again. Doctors and nurses took turns visiting. The rumor of the dog that called for help spread throughout the floors. A young intern tearfully shared, "I've never seen an animal act so quickly and accurately, it saved him." Bruno became a living symbol of the hospital. People called him Dr. Bruno, an unofficial title universally accepted with affection and respect. One night, I woke up to find the ICU room door slightly ajar. A nurse was sitting stroking Bruno's head, whispering, "When I lost my grandmother, I wished I had someone by my side like you're here for him." I said nothing. I just silently watched Bruno, my four-legged friend who had escaped the mud and saved me from death. The story between Bruno and me was no longer a private matter. It had inspired many, about loyalty, hope, and the unconditional love that sometimes only a dog can give to a human one. Early winter morning with dew still on the rooftops and sparrows chirping by the hospital window, I sat in my wheelchair by the window. Bruno lay next to my feet, his ears drooping, his eyes still following my every move. A knock on the door sounded. 3 short, decisive taps. I looked up. 2 men in military uniform stood outside, one older with a stern face, the other younger wearing a name tag, Lieutenant Jacobs, Mr. Thomas Reynolds. The older man spoke in a deep, respectful tone. "We're from the Army K9 Rehabilitation Unit. We're here for your dog." Bruno immediately stood up, his gaze sharpening. He didn't growl, but didn't take his eyes off the 2 strangers. Lieutenant Jacobs gently crouched down, pointing to Bruno's right ear. "Sir, under the fur here, there's a tattoo, K9 code R731. That's the code for Ranger, a dog who served in the Special Forces missing for nearly 8 months during a relocation training mission." I froze. Bruno, no Ranger, was once a warrior. We believed that after the incident, he might have been left behind, or someone deliberately concealed the information. The older officer inhaled deeply. "Until we read the report from the hospital about a dog pressing the emergency button to save its owner, we were sure. Ranger is still alive." I looked at Bruno, or rather Ranger, standing beside me, his demeanor unnervingly calm. It was as if he had known this all along, just waiting for me to realize it. We've come here." Lieutenant Jacobs continued, "because we'd like to invite you and Ranger to Fort Maple. There will be a ceremony in his honor. The people who served alongside him, they want to reunite with him." I paused. A storm brewed inside me, pride, gratitude, and also worry. I looked at Ranger, then at the 2 officers. I spoke slowly but firmly. "I'll go, but only under one condition. Ranger will stay with me." The room froze for a few seconds. The older officer smiled. "You saved him, and he saved you. I think the 2 of you have found each other, and that's what matters the most." Ranger gently placed his head on my knee, like the countless winter nights by the fireplace. That gaze, still the gaze of the dog, buried in the mud, but now I know who he is, a warrior, a hero, and most importantly, family. A week later, Ranger and I sat in the Ford Ranger, speeding down the road to Fort Benning, where once this place had been the training ground for warrior dogs like him. The sky was clear, but my heart was full of emotion. Not fear, but emotion. That feeling of returning to the beginning of a story I'd only stepped into halfway. Ranger lay beside me, his head resting on my knee, silent as always. But his ears were up, indicating that he too was alert. Recalling something, Fort Benning appeared in the distance. Majestic, somewhat cold. But as Ranger and I stepped out, every gaze turned toward us. Some had been waiting. The highest-ranking officer, General Grayson, personally came to greet us. His eyes couldn't hide the emotion when he saw Ranger. "Hello, warrior," he said gently, stroking Ranger's head. "You've returned." The ceremony was held in the central courtyard, dignified yet straightforward. The national flag waved in the breeze, the national anthem played, and soldiers in uniform stood at attention, in rows alongside retired K9 warriors and those who had served with them. I was invited to the podium with Ranger. When the national media cameras zoomed in, I could only think of this. I represented both of us. An old farmer and a 4-legged hero, General Grayson declared. "Today we honor a warrior who had been forgotten, not just for his bravery in combat, but for his absolute loyalty. not just to the military justice and to a human being. He then draped the Service Beyond Duty medal around Ranger's neck. It was a small, simple piece of metal, but it radiated an immeasurable value. The applause erupted. Ranger stood next to me, still unexcited. He just looked at me, his gaze deep as though understanding everything. I placed my hand on his head. We belong to each other, and we always will. The honor plaque was inscribed with the words, Ranger and Thomas, a bond forged in mud sealed by love. When we returned to the village, I brought the Army paperwork to the local office. I completed the official adoption procedures. Ranger was no longer a discarded warrior, no longer a number in classified files. He was family. I signed on the final line, then looked up and said to the clerk, "His name is Ranger, but to me he's Bruno, and now he's home." Ranger nuzzled his head into my hand, as if he'd been waiting for that moment for a long time. After the ceremony and all the paperwork was done, Ranger, or instead Bruno as I still called him, and I returned to our little house in the village. From that day on, every morning started with Bruno's nose gently nudging my hand, reminding me it was time for our walk. Even though he walked slower now, no longer as fast as before, he was always the guide, the companion at my side with every breath I took. We didn't speak much. In fact, why would we need words when two souls had already met through sorrow? We watched sunsets spread over the meadows, listened to the wind rustling through the trees, and sat silently gazing at the stars on the porch during the cold nights. I told stories. Stories about Clara, the wife I lost, about the war, about the loneliness that once consumed my heart. Bruno listened, as if he understood every word. But then I began to notice something change. One morning, Bruno didn't get up from his cozy bed. He still looked at me, his gaze gentle, but he couldn't lift his front paws. I panicked. "Come on, warrior. Our mission isn't over." I whispered gently, rubbing his back. He tried to stand, shaking. But then he collapsed again. I immediately called Dr. Fields, the vet who had treated Bruno after my heart attack. She arrived. Her face went still as she placed her hand on Bruno's back, stroking his thin, graying spine. "Thomas, he's exhausted. His hind legs show signs of neurological decline. The old injuries combined with his age, it's time." I choked up. "No, it can't be. Just yesterday, he sat with me on the porch, nudging my hand with his nose as I dozed off in the chair." I held Dr. Fields's hand. How long? She didn't answer immediately. She just placed her hand on my shoulder. "Love him fully for the time he has left." From that day, everything slowed down. I woke up earlier, made soft porridge, and sat beside Bruno, spooning him bites, like I did the first day I saved him from the mud. I moved his bed closer to the fireplace, added thick blankets, and slept beside him every night. And so, day after day, we lived quietly like two soldiers on their last mission, protecting each other until we couldn't anymore. Then one winter night, when the snow began to fall gently outside the window, I realized we were coming to the end of our story. It was a quiet winter night. Too quiet. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling something was wrong. There was no steady breathing next to me. As usual, there was no soft scratching of paws on the wooden floor. The cold seeped into the room wasn't from the wind, but from the emptiness. "Bruno." I called softly, my voice hoarse and trembling. No answer. I turned on the light, my old legs wobbling, sand aching as I walked down the narrow hallway. The soft yellow light from the living room shone through the door crack, the fire still smoldering in the hearth. And then I saw him. Bruno, or Ranger, was lying neatly on the old rug before the fireplace. Head turned toward me, his eyes were wide open, transparent, bright, and strangely calm. I knelt. Not now, not now. I wrapped my arms around his body, now growing cold. No moans, no barks. Just one last, deep breath, warm, then dissipated in the air, as if he had been waiting for the moment I showed up to say goodbye. There was no sobbing, just a mist gathering in my eyes, then spilling over. You came at the most perfect moment in my life. And now you've chosen the perfect moment to leave. I whispered my voice, breaking my hand, still stroking the fur that had grayed with time. I kissed the top of his head. Where his metal used to be, the place was once soaked in mud. The place that once rested against my chest whenever he heard me speak of Clara. The room was silent save for the crackling of the fire, and my arms holding my last friend, my last soldier, my last family. I don't remember how long I sat there. Maybe a few hours, perhaps the whole night. All I know is that I heard my heart break for the first time in many years. But not shatter, because within the pain there was love. Because within the loss there was a bond that will never die. It was still early morning when I took the shovel out to the garden, each step heavy, as if every step was a tear in my soul. No one forced me to do this, no grand funeral, there is no military band playing, just me. And the promise I whispered in his ear under the big oak tree where autumn dropped its golden leaves and summer provided a cool shade. I dug into the soft earth I had chosen earlier. That place had been where Bruno, Ranger, lay watching me read, his eyes half closed, but his ears always alert. If I must go, I'll leave you in a place with sun, wind, and where I can be with you every day. I placed him in a small wooden box lined with the same old flannel blanket I used to warm him when I rescued him from the mud years ago. I added his medal, a photo of us from the ceremony, and a handwritten letter, just a few lines. You came when I thought I was finished, and you left, after teaching me how to live again. Ranger, you weren't just a dog. You were my soulmate, my soldier, my family. I covered him with earth, each shovel full, feeling like I was burying a part of my soul. A package from the Army's K-9 recovery program arrived 3 days later. Inside was a shiny metal tag engraved with the words, Ranger Hero, Companion Guardian. I quietly attached it to the wooden cross I had carved, placing it on his grave. No ceremony. No crying, just the sound of the wind through the oak branches and the rustling as if someone was walking gently. That night I sat on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky, where Clara once told me that loyal souls become light that never fades. I took the knife, bent over, and carefully carved each letter into the beam above the doorway. Slowly, deliberately, like cutting into a memory. A dog saved my life. I will never forget him. When I finished, I sat down, my eyes burning, but my heart warm. The anger is gone. But his existence, from the muddy swamp to the hospital, from the ceremony to this porch, will never be forgotten, because some soldiers don't carry guns, but carry undying loyalty. And there are friendships that transcend the boundaries between humans and animals. Bruno, or rather Ranger, was not just a dog. He was the last bit of faith, the light in the darkness. The reason a forgotten old man wanted to keep living a life once abandoned. Returned to save another life. If you feel this story touched your heart, please share it, because somewhere out there, someone may need a friend like Ranger.